Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll talk about troop withdrawal deadlines, home ownership rates being back at 2000 levels, parking tickets for parking in your own driveway, and a tropical resort being ordered to cut down their palm trees. All that and more tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It's episode 108, and with you as always is Toby.
And Nick.
All right, we have a full show to get to. We're going to be talking about stuff that's local here in Keene, New Hampshire, updating people on the Sam Dodson case and the right to record in a public court, as well as going across to other nations and other lands that are doing asinine things with their government services, as well as some, well, focusing on the economy. But first, I want to start off in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Now, Nick, I didn't know anything about this, but it turns out that residents in Washington, D.C. simply don't own their own driveway. I don't understand it, but recently, as the economy has kind of started to stagger to a halt, cities and towns are really struggling to get the revenues, those tax dollars that they always get from the income tax. People aren't making as much money. Well, they're not getting as much. So they're finding ingenious ways to bring in some more revenue. And what they're doing in Washington, D.C. is beginning to give people parking tickets for parking in their own driveways. And I'm not talking about hanging out over the sidewalk a couple feet. I'm talking about all the way in your driveway. They're also issuing fines and arresting people for drinking a beverage on their own porch in some instances. This because Washington, D.C. officials consider your own driveway, and in some cases your own front porch, public property that you must maintain. Any area between the property line and the building restriction line shall be considered as private property, set aside and treated as public space under the care and maintenance of the property owner. So this means that it's public space that you paid for when you bought it, that you must take care of, but it's not yours. Now, one of the reasons this is coming to light is because one of the representatives in Washington, D.C., Beverly Anderson, is very upset because she got one of these tickets for parking in her own driveway, and she's mad about it, so it's making some headlines. I mean, this has been going on for a few months now, and many other residents have complained of similar things going on and getting similar tickets. They're $20 tickets each every time they're issued, and people are having to pay this. I mean, when you own your own driveway, do you have the right to park in it, Nick?
Well, apparently Washington, D.C. doesn't think so. At least the city government doesn't. And it just seems ridiculous. I mean, it's private property.
I thought this was a story from The Onion or something that was not true, because how ridiculous it is. In supposedly the freest country in the world, in the nation's capital nonetheless, you're not allowed to drink a beer on your own front porch or park in your own driveway. You're supposed to build a garage. I mean, you pay for the land. It's your land. Oh, wait, no, it's public property that you must maintain. We're not talking about a sidewalk. We're talking about your driveway. Yeah. I mean, you either need to build your driveway past your house, because if you don't pull your car beyond the facade of your house, which is the front of your building, unless you have a driveway that goes beyond your building, or you have a garage, well, you're going to be getting these tickets. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It would be one thing if you were getting these tickets and, say, the city maintained your driveway, which they probably wouldn't do a very good job at, and mowed your lawn, which they probably also wouldn't do a very good job at. But the idea that the city can ticket you for parking on your own property, but then they tell you that it's not really your own property when they want to extract money from you, the city's trying to have it both ways, and it's just hard to come up with what to say about it. It's certainly a blatant violation of private property rights. I mean, more so than any other story I've heard of.
Well, I guess it's not private property rights, it's public property rights. I don't know. It just seems so ridiculous, because you pay for your front lawn, you pay for everything beyond the facade of your house, but you don't own it. And it's just baffling to me. It should also be noted that Beverly Anderson was contacting some of the city officials and asking if, well, maybe could you give us warnings first? That would be nice, right? But no, they're not even going to do that. No warnings for you. You just pay the ticket. Or they did say this: you can lease your own driveway. The right to park in your own driveway, you can lease it and buy a parking sticker for your own driveway. Beverly says she looked into it, and it costs thousands of dollars, though, so it's not a very viable option.
I know even here in Keene, New Hampshire, the parking permits cost, I'm not sure if it's thousands, but it's a lot of money. So you can imagine that in Washington, D.C., it would be substantially more money than it is here.
Which you could kind of think of as reasonable if you were leasing something on the street. That's public property. I mean, then they'd own it and you're leasing something that's theirs, but this
At
is
least they
leasing
don't
your
try
own
to,
driveway.
right, at least you weren't ever under the impression that you owned the road in front of your house. They just claim to have control over it, and they don't say that you actually own any of it, which at least they're being consistent in that case. But in this case, they're trying to say that your driveway is private property, but the city can fine you for parking there just because you're parked on your own property, not for actually causing a problem.
Or arrest you for drinking in public, for having a beer on your front porch. Well, it's asinine, but hell, what do you think? What do you expect from the officials in the freest country in the world, in the capital of the freest country in the world? Well, anyways, while the Washington, D.C. Officials are out there campaigning for freedom of every step, some of the others are campaigning around the world to give others this great freedom that we have. So let's take a look at what they're doing around the world and concentrate a little bit on the Iraq war. Nick, I believe you have the latest on what our government is doing to spread the freedom as far and wide as possible.
Well, actually, the U.S. government seems like they're sort of downsizing the whole spreading the freedom in Iraq thing because they are attempting, supposedly, to meet their troop withdrawal deadlines that they agreed to with the Iraqi government. But there's a catch. The deadline for withdrawing U.S. combat forces from Iraqi cities is this June 30th. Now, not surprisingly, they're backtracking now that that date is getting closer. What they will most likely be doing is leaving combat troops in the city of Mosul, where apparently there's been a renewed insurgency. So wherever there's violence, they're not going to pull out combat troops. And so, I mean, I guess all the insurgents really have to do is start up more violence in other cities, and they won't withdraw troops from there either. They're also going to be leaving soldiers at the Camp Victory base complex in Baghdad, which is capable and does house over 20,000 soldiers. Most of them are combat troops. So they're not withdrawing them from the capital city. They're leaving a second base open in Baghdad as well, Forward Operating Base Falcon, which can hold about 5,000 troops. And both of these are well within the city limits of Baghdad, but apparently they're just backtracking on this pledge because, well, who knows?
Well, I know the reason. It's because Obama is such the anti-war candidate, right?
Right.
So you'd expect this of him.
Right. And, people are going to say, well, how significant is this? I mean, even if they're moving the combat troops out of the cities, they're still going to leave them, somewhere in the country or in that theater, which is correct.
We're still having to pay for them to be there. I mean, it's still costing us just as much money.
Right. It's a good point. But what I think this story points at is the fact that the Obama administration is not in any real hurry to get out of Iraq, or even meeting deadlines and promises that they've made in troop withdrawal with the Iraqi government. So most likely, we're going to see the timetable for actual withdrawal of combat forces and hopefully eventually withdrawal of all U.S. forces from Iraq pushed back. I know that he was campaigning on, I think, maybe it was 12 months on the campaign trail. I don't remember. Then he pushed it back to 13, 14. It's at 16 months now for withdrawing combat forces, and there are proposals to push that back to 24 more months before withdrawing combat forces, which really isn't much different than what the Bush administration was saying when they were talking about the idea of troop withdrawal. They were saying, well, maybe in a couple of years. So it's not very difficult for Barack Obama to make this stand for peace by saying, well, maybe in a year and a half, 2 years, maybe then we'll pull just the active combat forces out of Iraq.
And move them over to Afghanistan or Pakistan or some other place. I mean, it's not like he's pulling troops in from around the world. He's still having them fight wars. So, I mean,
right.
It just boggles my mind how people can drive around with an Obama sticker right next to a little peace sticker. I mean, do you really think this guy's a candidate for peace? He's saying exactly what Barack Obama said.
You mean Bush?
He's saying exactly what Bush said, except he's much better at it. He's a much better orator. I don't know.
That's certainly true. At least he's got that going for him. But what you said is true. I mean, many of these troops are being pulled out of Iraq, are going to be transferred over to Afghanistan. And the fact is, right now, there's no clear deadline or timetable for actually pulling all U.S. forces out of Iraq. So we're probably going to have a situation much like we had after Korea, which is still going on today, where we have an ongoing occupation even after most of the fighting is over, which is very expensive.
Oh,
and it always leaves a possibility open that insurgents are going to decide to attack the non-combat forces and try to suck us back in.
Right. Well, when we're in a recession or depression, we have no money, I guess you can always go and fight for it and to take tax dollars that way. I mean, I don't know. It just seems asinine to be spending billions of dollars and billions of dollars fighting and killing other people that are only pissing them off when we can't even afford to pay our own bills. Anyways, let's move along. A lot of people have been wondering, why no set? I mean, we talked about it. We raised money for it. We met all the money that we needed for it a while ago, and we still have got nothing here. Well, it has to do with another story we've been following, with which Sam Dodson from the Obscured Truth Network, well, he is currently behind bars. We reported that he was arrested approximately, by the time people are seeing this, 3 weeks ago for attempting to videotape a public trial. He never made it into the courtroom. He made it into the lobby where they arrested him for videotaping in a so-called public lobby before even getting into the court. This is Keene District Court, and he's did a little bit of civil disobedience, continued to roll the camera. He was arrested. He refused to process and give his full legal name, which made them strip him of all his rights, put him away into a jail cell, and are currently, well, they're not letting him out until he's willing to give his full legal name, which begs the question, is the Fifth Amendment at all valid here? Do you have the right to remain silent? Well, they've been telling Sam that he's going to be remaining in jail until he starts to speak, so I guess there's no Fifth Amendment. They're also withholding a trial from him until he's willing to cooperate and give his full legal name, which begs the question of, well, where's the right to speedy trial? I mean, what's speedy? I mean, if you're in jail indefinitely until you're willing to not remain silent, which you have the Fifth Amendment right to do, I mean, how does this all work out? Seems like the Keene District Court, kind of like they're making up the rules with their banning cameras from the courtroom, are also violating basic constitutional rights as well. But it's no surprise, they are the government, and while Sam is behind jail, well, he can't build our set. Now all the pieces are ordered, they're all ready to go. We were actually scheduled to be working on it the past few weekends with him, but, well, he can't. He's in jail.
And hopefully he will be out soon. I mean, I can't imagine they're going to hold him indefinitely. So eventually they will let him out. But, I mean, they've taken 3 weeks from him, and he hasn't
wasted thousands and thousands of taxpayer dollars. It should also be noticed that another case we've been following, Andrew Carroll, who did some of the civil disobedience with marijuana. He doesn't smoke marijuana, doesn't have any intention to, but he decided to hold some of it in his hand and get arrested to show that it's just hurting nobody to hold an innocent plant in your hand, but you'll still get arrested for it. He's due in court on Friday when the show is being released, and he is refusing to cooperate with the trial unless cameras are allowed into the courtroom. He says he's going to show up, but he's not really going to be cooperating because, well, who's watching the watchers? If I have the right to trial, don't I have the right for people to videotape it and show it to the rest of the world what's happening? I mean, really, who's watching the watchers?
And one wonders what they have to hide if they don't want video cameras in the courtroom that badly. I mean, the fact is the process doesn't always work, or it doesn't work most of the time in the way you're told it does in high school civics class. I mean, there are some serious flaws with the system. A lot of people are forced into pleading guilty or pushed into pleading guilty by being offered, you know, very reduced sentences from a very dramatic, overly draconian sentence. You know, you could go to jail for 10 years for this, but we'll let you off with time served if you plead guilty. Now that's a pretty dramatic example, but that's things not much less ridiculous go on, you know, every day in court.
Well, if you want to get updates on this, we now have a blog up at freemindsmedia.org or Free Minds TV, Free Minds Radio. Any of those addresses will get you there. But we're going to be regularly blogging, so there will be us as well as other people throwing up some blogs and offering the latest news stories about what's happening with Sam, what's happening with Andrew Carroll and his civil disobedience, and you can also get all the latest news at freekeene.com. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, a New Zealand resort orders, New Zealand government orders a resort to chop down its palm trees, for fear of muggers hiding behind them, as well as a whole lot more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
This is Will Buchanan. I walked 3,200 miles across the country to move to New Hampshire for liberty, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
I'd like to invite you onto our website, freemindstv.com. From there, there's all sorts of stuff, the archives, the new blog, and a whole lot more. more, freemindstv.com. All right, we have a lot to get to and not all that much time, so let's get right into it. We are going to be getting into the article from New Zealand about the government forcing them to chop down palm trees for fear of muggers. It's pretty ridiculous, but first, let's stick to here in the United States and talk a little bit about the economy and home prices / home dwellers.
Yeah, right. The Census Bureau has reported that the home ownership rate is back to roughly the level it was at in the second quarter of the year 2000. So obviously a lot of people are being foreclosed upon. Not as many people are entering the market for buying new homes. So the fact is there are fewer people who can call themselves homeowners today in the U.S. than there were than there were 3 or 4 years ago. It's the same level as it was 9 years ago. And a lot of people are talking about this like it's a negative thing, which it is a very painful experience for those people going through foreclosure. It's obviously not something that anybody wants to go through. But the fact of the matter is a lot of these people who are being foreclosed upon or who for whatever reason are no longer owning a home, maybe they sold at a loss or sold quickly to get out of the market and they're renting now. The fact is they probably never should have been homeowners in the first place. I mean, the government created a situation where there was very easy credit. They artificially reduced interest rates to make banks more willing to make risky loans. And the fact of the matter is we had the highest ever levels of home ownership rates during the so-called real estate bubble. So the fact that it's getting back to a relatively steady historic average is actually a good sign. It means we're getting back to an actual sustainable basis for the economy.
Pop the bubble and let's get back to the true low, I think is what you're trying to get at here.
Right, and it's painful, but the stock market probably, the Dow probably never should have been around 14,000.
Yeah,
the reason at one point had lost over half its value from its high was that it was overvalued. And the fact that, a lot of people did lose equity when that bubble popped, but the fact of the matter is it's probably closer to where it actually should be today.
Yeah, well, little known fact, in the stock market, if you had invested in it back in the earlier 1900s, compared with the dollar, it hasn't actually earned any money. It's been a safe holding just like gold is. I mean, it's gone up, but so has inflation, and actually it's the exact same. You could have invested in all the stocks on average, put $1 in each one of them, and you'd have just as much money as if you had just put the money under your mattress. So
the only thing you do get from the stocks is dividends.
Sometime too.
Right, and you do get dividends, which are essentially like interest, but you could put it into a savings account and get 5% interest instead of dividends, and it would do pretty much the same thing.
There you go. Well, anyways, let's move on to something a little, it's less serious to us because it's happening in New Zealand. But I mean, if you're there, it's pretty sad because it has so much to do with this ridiculous government nanny statism, get involved in your business crap that we really hate here on Free Minds TV. And it's having to do with the New Zealand government telling the Torquay's Promenade that has been around since the 1820s, along with its palm trees. They're telling them that they have to chop down the trees, and they did just that. They had to chop down the trees because, it looks like teenagers and youths decided to hang out around the trees, and there was also fear that muggers might hide behind the trees and come out and mug people. So if we just create a huge open vast field or chop them down next to the beach, muggers won't be able to hide, youths won't be able to congregate. I don't really connect the dots on that one, but I guess the bureaucrats do, and we'll all be safer. In the name of safety, let's take away our palm trees, Nick. If I go to a resort, I'm just saying here real quick, if I'm going to a resort, I want the palm trees. I'm paying for the palm trees. That's part of the resort atmosphere. I'm not going to a resort that has no palm trees. And
they could just pave it all. Then there's no tall grass for muggers to hide in either. I mean, you definitely have a problem when the government is trying to address, say, mugging by cutting down the trees in which the muggers hide. Even if they did, even if there were muggers in that area, which the article really doesn't say that they were having much of a problem in the first place.
It was a fear.
Yes, it sounds more like they were concerned about it. Well, if there were muggers who were, carrying out their trade there, because essentially they're career criminals or, professionals to some degree or another, they're just going to go somewhere else. Probably pretty close by, because it's not like there's nowhere else where they can hide. It's not even like muggers always are hiding.
I don't know. I've never really talked to muggers. See if that's what they do is hide behind trees. I mean, by this logic, the rainforest must be one of the most dangerous places in the world. Real big trees back there. You could hide like 8 muggers a piece behind each tree. I mean, you're talking about millions of muggers, Nick. I don't know. I don't think we should chop them down, but some people would say yes.
Yeah, I mean, if
In the name of safety.
If people in New Zealand were not facing jail time for arming themselves to defend themselves, you would probably see violent crime rates go down. That's certainly what happened in Florida when they made it easier for people to carry weapons there. And the data has shown that in pretty much every U.S. state that has relaxed the laws about carrying weapons, violent crime rates almost always go down. And there's really very little evidence that when strict gun control laws are put in place, that violent crime goes down at all. In many cases, it goes up. That was the case in England.
And a lot of the time, you'll see statistics. Well, there's almost zero gun fatalities over in the UK now since they banned guns. Well, yeah, there's also a huge increase in stabbings and other kinds of brutal killings instead. I mean, it's not the gun that makes them kill them. If someone wants to kill someone, there's multiple ways. I mean, I guess you could probably kill someone with a spoon if you want. Actually, we reported on that. In some places in the UK, you need to be over 18 years of age to buy spoons and other silverware because, well, it's just too dangerous to have a spoon and a butter knife and take it home. You gotta be 18. So stop the stabbings. I mean, you're not stopping them. You're just shifting the statistics over to, well, the knife deaths or sword deaths. So you're seeing a spike in sword deaths. Well, since when are there sword deaths? Well, when you take away guns, people get swords, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they'll probably try to move in on the swords, but then you'll just get pointed sticks, which are going to be a lot harder to control.
And sharpened toothbrush and whatnot. I mean, there's no gun. The prisoners in prison don't have guns, but people get murdered all the time. All right, moving right along. Oh, one thing I wanted to point out before we move along is they didn't mention that coconuts fall from trees and kill a lot of people every year. That seems like the #1 reason for safety measures you would be getting rid of palm trees. But I guess
I think I've heard that coconuts kill more people than sharks, but I might be wrong on that.
Well, sharks don't kill all that many people. It's just sensationalized when they do. All right, let's move along. Last week we reported on, well, it was the 11 government programs that were feel-good programs, but failed, flopped flat on their face. Among those were such programs as DARE, speed bumps, and speed laws. But we also asked some of the viewers to submit their own, and because it was one guy's blog that we were counting down, and I know that we didn't get to all of them, and there were a lot of people that thought that, well, we didn't cover some that should be covered. So among those that were shifted over to us was the war on drugs, some of the excessive gun laws in the United States, as well as public schools and the government bailouts that so far aren't really doing much. I guess we can't really tell too much. Let's not put the cart before the horse. But anyways, a lot of people emailed in letting us know that the government bailouts were a failed program. Now let's tackle these, I guess, one at a time. We don't have too much time to do this here, Nick. But let's take the war on drugs. We've talked about this in great depth. I mean, if you're new to the show, check out the archives at freemindstv.com. But I mean, the war on drugs is a total and complete failure. There are far more, millions and millions of more people addicted to harmful drugs than before there were any laws on the books. And what we've really seen is, well, it's shifted over to the black market, created a whole lot of money for criminals, and has done absolutely nothing whatsoever to reduce drug use.
Right, and it makes drug use more dangerous. I mean, you don't have any recourse really against drug cartels or your drug dealers, so you get a lot of drug impurities, much in the same way that during alcohol prohibition you had washtub gin. It's very similar. People were going blind from, well, adulterated booze in the same way that a lot of people die from adulterated illicit substances in the United States now. So it has failed to reduce the amount of use. In many cases, drug use has shot up. And it makes that drug use more dangerous. Plus, you get violence associated with the black market. I think it's around 10,000 people in Mexico have been killed since 2005 in drug trafficking-related violence.
Meanwhile, our prisons have filled up, and we're wasting billions and billions of dollars on this war on drugs. And we've seen that other parts of the world. Portugal, back in, I think it was 2001, decriminalized all drugs for the user level, and they've seen the numbers of people using harmful drugs, as well as drugs such as cannabis, go way down, cut in half, I mean, compared to other parts of the UK. So, I mean, what we see is when you decriminalize drugs, we haven't seen a whole lot of evidence where you completely legalize drugs because the war on drugs is pretty much worldwide. But I think that it would be safe to say, and the argument could be made that if you legalize drugs, you'd get even more results. So, war on drugs, definite failure. all these restrictive gun laws. I think there's 20,000 plus federal gun laws, as well as a myriad of local and state laws on the books. Well, we already talked a little bit about it. You see that in places like Washington, D.C., where there's been a huge ban on handguns, and recently the Supreme Court overruled it. But I don't know if you can still go out and just buy a handgun today.
Well, no, the city government in D.C. is trying to block any exercise of your Second Amendment rights as much as possible, even though there's a court ruling against them.
Well, it's also one of the most dangerous places in the United States. You see that there's no guns allowed. Well, you're getting into more dangerous territory.
Well, yeah, it's illegal to own guns. It's not that there are no guns in D.C., and that's what gun laws tend to do. It's largely victim disarmament, and that's about all it does, because criminals who are likely to be violent are not concerned about a weapons charge if they're prone to kill people or threaten people at gunpoint. They're just not the kind of people who are concerned about jail time.
A weapons charge is nothing compared to a murder charge, so I don't know how you're going to win this case. Of course, it should also be noted, if you're someone out there that believes in all these gun laws and people shouldn't be allowed to pack heat, well, why don't you go out and put a big old sign in your front yard that says, this house contains no guns. See how safe you feel then. I mean, I don't think a lot of people are going to do it. Even the people who are really anti-gun and say no one should have guns, not even police officers, would refuse to put that sign in their front yard because they know it would be completely stupid. But when you disarm a population, that's essentially what you're doing. You're saying, home invaders, come here, please. All right, let's move along real quick. Public schools, dumbing down of America, little choice, taking the parents out of the situation, and, well, it's also taxing us all. I mean, people who don't have kids are having to pay for other kids' education. Seems a little bit unfair to me.
Yeah, I mean, public school education is very expensive compared to the actual return on what, graduates of public schools in America, they differ from district to district, but by and large, graduates of public high school in the United States are not very well educated, especially in topics like, well, civics.
Well, the public school issue is almost an entire another show, and we're running low. We'll have to see if the government bailout, I'm predicting total flop. So far it has been, but who knows? I guess we'll talk about that more in the future. Well, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Log on to freemindstv.com for everything else, and tune in live this Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an all-new live edition of Free Minds Radio. Have a good night.
My next door neighbor, Jim the barber, got arrested in 1989. He got caught with 1 pound of grass and he did 2 years of hard time. He was released, he lost his shop with a felony on his record. Now he lives on the streets in West Chicago, that's the last that I heard. Don't you think it's absurd? We gotta stand together. There's a million Jims in jail for weed. Stand together. Well, I thought this was the land of the free. I know what you're thinking, that we've got bigger fish to fry. Well, let me break down the math for you guys. There were 765,000 marijuana arrests in 2007. That's not for dealers and kingpins, no, that's just for simple possession. Multiply that by the average cost of each arrest, and what have you got? $7.6 billion spent on people just smoking some pot. That's enough money to buy health insurance for every child that needs it. That's enough cash to adopt every stray dog and enough left over to feed it. Mr. Obama, I kinda wrote this song for you. You got my vote for change, now let's see what you can